Good morning, Wendy. We will get started in just a moment. Good morning, Patricia. Good morning, everyone. My name is Casey Quartz. I'm a digital learning specialist with BPS. If you want to go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat, feel free. You can find the chat at the bottom of your screen in the black bar where the all of the Zoom controls are. And I see several people have come in. Wonderful to have everybody. We'll wait just a few more minutes to get started. By my clock, it is 9:59, so I'll give people a few more minutes. Hi, Glendina. Wonderful to have you here.
Hi, folks.
And this is my colleague, Nick Gonzalez, also from BPS Technology.
How's everybody doing?
Great, thank you.
And it's great to see Annette. Hi, Annette. I recognize you from last week. It's funny, I'm getting to know some faces and names, so this is nice.
I see Wendy and Annette and Patricia, Glendina, Paula.
Little reading rainbow.
A little romper room for us.
Yeah.
I wish I
Awesome.
had like that big magnifying glass.
Yep. Okay, well, while we're getting started, Nick, would you mind just throwing that link to the form in the chat? Just
Sure do.
Awesome, thank you.
Will do.
The link I'm talking about is a link to a Google form, and basically by filling that out, we just get your name and your email address. If you can specify that you attended today's webinar, then we can send you the recording as well as the slide deck. And there are a bunch of resources in here that you'll want to have. So if you wouldn't mind filling that out, that would be fabulous. So I know Nick is going to put that in the chat momentarily. And like I said, we'll just wait another minute or two just to see if people come in, and then we can get started. And feel free, if you haven't already, thanks, Nick. If you haven't already, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. My name is Casey Quartz. I'm a digital learning specialist with BPS Technology, and I'm joined by my colleague, Nick Gonzalez, who's also a digital learning specialist here.
Hi, folks.
He's kind enough to be watching the chat for me this morning. It's hard to be a one-woman band where you're talking and then people are writing in the chat. So it's great to have a team approach. And I would actually, I'll talk about this when I give the presentation this morning. It's a best practice to use even in your classroom as well. Just to have another set of eyes on the chat is always really helpful. So you can certainly post questions, as Nick just noted, in the chat as well. Once we get started, I'll show you, we do have dedicated time in the presentation for Q&A, but I also welcome, if you have questions in the moment, please feel free to unmute your mic or to type your questions in the chat, and I'm happy to answer them. So thank you. So it looks as if, let's see, we've got, it's about 10:02. I'm going to go ahead and get started just because I want to honor your time. All of you are here on time, and I know you have lots going on, so I want to make sure that we get underway. So for those of you who just came in, my name is Casey Quartz. I'm a digital learning specialist with BPS Tech. I'm here today with my colleague, Nick Gonzalez. He's waving to you. And He'll be helping me today facilitate this webinar, specifically spending some time in the chat, posting links and making sure that I know if there's anything in the chat that I've missed, I can go back to and make sure I answer those questions. We're going to be talking about some best practices today around Zoom. And just general housekeeping, there's a link to a form that has been put in the chat. Please make sure that you go ahead and fill out that form. It asks for your name, your email address, and the name of the webinar you're running today. The reason why we ask for that is so that we can send you the recording of this webinar as well as the slide deck. There are links that are embedded in the slide deck that you can't click on when I'm sharing my screen in Zoom, but you'll be able to get all of those once you get a copy of the slide deck. So make sure you fill out that form if you wouldn't mind. I see that Nick has posted that in the chat again, so that's fantastic. So, and I think most of you have updated your name in Zoom. This is definitely something I would share with your students when they're joining in Zoom. In order to change it from their BPS ID, what they do is they mouse over either their image or the block that has their BPS ID in it, and those three little dots appear. They click on those three little dots, drop-down menu appears, and they should choose rename. But it seems like most of you have done that, so that's fantastic. So just a general overview of our agenda today. I'm going to do an overview of Zoom. This is definitely a 101. So if you're looking for more sort of advanced Zoom tutorials, definitely join us in our office hours. We'll have those later today, and I'll share a calendar of when you can meet up with us throughout the day and the week. Well, this will give you a general overview of the tool. I'll go through some pro tips, things to definitely do, things to not do. You can see that I've put in some dedicated time for Q&A, and then, but as I said, please feel free to stop me throughout the presentation if you have questions. And then I'll be sharing some additional resources and next steps. And I see that Nick is answering a question about how to change the name in the chat. So thank you, Nick, for taking care of that. So hopefully by the end of today's session, you will feel familiar with Zoom. You'll have a sense of how you might use Zoom with your students. You'll know about a bunch of different resources that have to do with Zoom. And hopefully I'm able to answer any questions that arise. If there's a question that I don't get to, that appears to you later or occurs to you later, feel free to reach out either in our office hours, which is really a dedicated time for us to be able as a team, and there are 7 of us on the digital learning team who are happy to meet with you and answer any questions of a digital learning nature. So feel free to join us there, or I'm gonna actually right now in the chat, I'm gonna put my email address so that you all have it. And if anything comes up that I don't get to today, feel free to email me there. It's kkorts@bostonpublicschools.org. So what is Zoom? Zoom is a video conferencing tool, and it's what we are in right now. So I want to give you a little bit of a tour of Zoom. What you'll notice is that there is this sort of menu of images, or if someone's not on camera, it just has their name written in white text behind a black background, or on top of, I should say, a black background. And then at the bottom of your screen, if you kind of take your cursor and you mouse around, you'll see a black bar that appears. And that black bar is where sort of all the menu, or all the tools rather, that are available to you in Zoom appear. That's where you find the chat. That's where you find the ability to mute and unmute yourself. And I would recommend the first time or two that you're using Zoom with students that you give them a little kind of, look around a Zoom room so that they have a sense of, okay, this is where we are, this is where we're meeting, this is how I change my name, this is how I access the chat, this is how I mute myself or unmute myself. And in terms of sort of general best practices around Zoom, generally speaking, if someone's not speaking, it's a great idea to mute, just because we're all at home now in environments that we can't control. I will definitely speak to the fact that I have a child and a dog. And it can often get a little loud. So I try to mute myself when I'm on a Zoom call as much as possible when I'm not speaking, so that people don't get all of my background noise. So that's really what Zoom is. It's a video conferencing tool where you can be on camera or not. You can use your microphone, or you can use the chat, or you can use both. Within the chat, you can share links. I'll talk a little bit about if you want to share documents with students, how you might do that. And really it's this environment right here. And what I want to spend the bulk of my time doing today is giving you an overview of sort of pro tips as well as resources to kind of get you started in Zoom. The number one piece of advice I could give you when working in Zoom is to explore it and practice, practice, practice. And when I say practice, you really need at least one other person with whom to practice Zoom. And the reason is because it's sort of predicated on there being an audience, right? So you might need to invite a colleague or one of us on the digital learning team to a Zoom meeting that you set up, and I'll show you how to do that in a moment. Just so, you can ask the, whomever you invite, is this appearing the way I wanted it to appear? Like I'm sharing something on my screen. Are you able to see it? I can tell you in my first few Zoom meetings, I thought that I was sharing a slide deck I had prepared. I was feeling great about it. And then finally, some kind soul in the chat said, we can't see anything that you're talking about. And I thought, oh, maybe I should have checked. So it's all of those little best practices, checking to say, hey, can you see what's on my screen? That will come to you after you practice it once or twice or 10 times. But feel okay about the fact that this is new to so many of us. So many of us. It's going to be new to your students. It's new to your colleagues, and that's all right. So just try to, approach it with a spirit of exploration. And sometimes, sharing your screen will go the way you meant it to. And other times people will be like, wait a minute, I don't see the slide deck. That's okay. We're all sort of learning as we go here. So that's a general kind of overview of what Zoom is. But we'll get more into sort of how to use it now. So I want to launch into some pro tips. The way you'll want to log into Zoom is through Clever. And the way to do that is to go through bostonpublicschools.org/backpack. I think Nick is going to put that link in the chat right now. I know that you can access Zoom in other ways. You want to access Zoom through Clever, and I'll explain why. Zoom partnered with Clever several weeks ago. Essentially what they did was they approached school systems that were already using Clever and said, we will make Zoom available as a staff link. So essentially for school districts that are using Clever, like Boston Public Schools, you log into Clever and under staff links, you will see Zoom. You'll be asked, if you've already created a Zoom account outside of Clever, you might be asked the first time you log in through Clever if you want to merge these accounts. The answer is yes, you will want to merge them. You might even be asked something about, do you want to join Kevin Arias's account? I know that sounds weird and definitely not a digital citizenship sort of best practice, but the answer is yes. And the reason is because Kevin Arias is the member of the OIIT team who actually managed this merge between Zoom and Clever for Boston Public Schools. So if you were asked that question, don't panic. The answer is yes. There was no way to depersonalize this from Kevin's ID. So just don't think that there's some random person named Kevin who's now part of your Zoom account. It's actually, it's legitimate. And this is how you, yes, thank you. Thank you, Nick, for putting that in the chat. So Sarah asked, if I haven't been asked to merge accounts, is there a way to still do so? If you haven't been asked to merge your account, that's okay. This is basically, if you have a personal account outside of the BPS environment, that doesn't apply. We're talking about if, let's say, you had a separate BPS, there was a dialogue that was popping up for some people asking if these needed to be merged. If you haven't been asked, don't worry, Sarah, but if you are asked, we just want people to know that the answer is yes, and that's okay. It's a great clarifying question. The number one reason why we want, you're very welcome. The number one reason we want people to log into Zoom through Clever is that all of the security features that I'm going to talk about that are available to Boston Public Schools teachers through Zoom are only available through this portal. So if you don't log in through Clever, then the security features I'm going to be talking about, because I know all of us have probably heard about Zoom bombing and other issues that are happening with Zoom in school systems. We can't protect, as a school system, we can't protect outside accounts. We can manage the security features of things that are happening within that Clever environment. So please spread the word, talk to your colleagues. please only log into Zoom through Clever. So that's sort of step one as a layer of security. Step two, there is the ability within Zoom to log in to, or to use a feature within Zoom called a personal meeting room. One of the great things about a personal meeting room is that essentially every user who has a Zoom account is given their like a unique ID that they can use repeatedly, so that students know, oh, this is, you know, Mrs. Quartz's personal meeting room, and I can always go there, you know, for all of her meetings. So the advantage is the same as the disadvantage here. The advantage is that it's a number that can be known to an audience that they can return to again and again. I think you can probably see where I'm going with this. The disadvantage is that if someone who does not belong in your classroom, someone who's outside the BPS environment, gets a hold of that personal meeting ID, they can access that room. So please do not use, we are strongly discouraging the use of personal meeting rooms. They always have the same URL. They don't have a waiting room, and I'll talk about what a waiting room is in a moment, enabled by default. So please do not choose that as an option when you're working with students. Some of you might have already started using a personal meeting room. That's okay. We're talking about moving forward. We would prefer that Boston Public Schools teachers not use the personal meeting room because of this issue, that you know, people outside the BPS environment can access that room once they know what that ID is. So we've already said don't use the personal meeting room, but if you are going to use a personal meeting room, these are all of the settings you would need to set in order to try to keep it secure. You can see that I have several red arrows here on my screen, and these all have to do with different settings that are enabled as a default through Clever. If you're not using the personal meeting room, you would want to have both the camera for both the host and the participant off. You would want the ability for attendees to join before the host definitely set to off. You would want to mute participants upon entry. You would want to enable the waiting room. These are all things that you don't have to worry about if you don't use the personal meeting room. But I just wanted to highlight here, if this is something that you want to, you want to use the personal meeting room, these would be all the settings you would need to enable. This doesn't apply if you just don't use the personal meeting room. So if you take nothing else away, please log in through Clever, and please don't use the personal meeting room. If I could have a shirt emblazoned with that message, I would wear it, just because Zoom is such a great tool and I want to make it work for everybody. These are really the ways to really keep our kids safe in this environment. So in terms of what a waiting room is, the screenshot that I have here on screen where I talk about meeting options, and you can see sort of like toward the bottom of the screen, it says enable join before host. So for this particular Zoom meeting that we're in right now, we had it so that you probably received a notification if you were waiting for me to start the meeting. Meeting hasn't started yet. Meeting, you'll be let into the room once the meeting begins. If I wasn't already in the meeting, that's a waiting room. It's basically a message that attendees get if you haven't yet logged into the room. It does not mean that all of your attendees, meaning your students, are waiting together in an unsecured place without an adult supervising. That is not what it is at all. It's entirely a screen that pops up for your students that says, this meeting hasn't started yet, please wait while the host comes in. And then once you come in, they're allowed into the room. That's what the waiting room is. It's a virtual waiting room where they're basically just in a holding pattern. They get a screen that lets them know that they can't come into the room yet because the host hasn't arrived. Doesn't mean that they're congregating together. It's just that they get that tells them. Any questions about the waiting room? One other point I wanted to make about the personal meeting ID that you use. You happen to use a personal meeting room and you're feeling like, wow, I don't want to do that anymore. Is there a way I can reset it? And in fact, reset your personal meeting ID. It's a setting within Zoom on the back end of things. If you have questions about that, I'm happy to walk you through that one-on-one, but it is just a setting in Zoom. So don't worry if you have used it, you don't want to use it anymore, or you want to have it changed. That's absolutely fine. That's something we can do. So other pro tips to make Zoom as secure and as successful as possible for you and your students. I would recommend calendar. I would recommend is that way you can send invitations to your students through through your calendar. You can also, if you just want to create the invitation through Zoom, you can copy and paste the information from, about the meeting and share it either through Google Classroom or via email. But in terms of sort of eliminating those extra steps, if you want to do it directly from your Google Calendar, that's something you can definitely do. I know that it is sort of asking something impossible here, but I recommend this within a tolerance. Trying to find a quiet space to run your Zoom meeting. I already mentioned my child and my dog. I run all of my Zoom meetings from a guest room that is the furthest room away in my house from my kitchen, which is the loudest room in my house. It's probably the loudest room in many of our homes. So try to just find the quietest. It might not be a quiet space, but it's the quietest, knowing that we're all working from home now. The reason why I recommend that is really so that you can hear your students and they can hear you. Trying to minimize background noise is really a best practice when you're working in Zoom. Another pro tip I would offer is trying to log into the room 15 minutes ahead of time. And again, if you're enabling the waiting room, which is a default setting in Zoom through Clever, so you don't have to enable that yourself. But when you go into the room 15 minutes ahead of time, that doesn't mean your students can immediately join when you join. It means that you have joined Zoom, and then if they happen to try to join in that 15 minutes before the meeting starts, they'll just get that message on their screen that says, the meeting hasn't started yet. The meeting will open basically when the host opens the meeting. The reason why I advise joining 15 minutes ahead of time is just to make sure that your camera and your headset are working. If you are appearing on camera, you'll want to make sure that your camera works. There isn't a requirement to appear on camera, but if you are, you'll want to make sure that it's working. You'll also want to make sure that your headset is working. If it's not, what I would recommend to you is you can, try the time-honored tradition of unplugging your headset and plugging it in. You can also shut down your computer and restart. I know that's sort of the most stereotypical advice offered by someone in IT, but it actually does really help to do a hard reset of Zoom so that basically your headset and your camera are kind of all connected and communicating with each other between the computer and Zoom itself. So if you give yourself that 15 minutes of sort of lead time before your event begins, then you'll really be able to do that. I would also recommend including some contracting norms ahead of time. And when I say ahead of time, I would mean actually probably in either Google Classroom or via email before any meeting using Zoom. And what I mean by contracting norms is sort of what are your expectations going to be for your Zoom meeting. So if you want student cameras to be on, reminding students that if their cameras are on, everyone in the meeting can see them. If you feel as if that isn't an appropriate choice for your students, that's absolutely fine. But you'll want to set that as a setting on the back end of things in Zoom to make sure that cameras aren't enabled. If you are going to be on camera with your students, again, that's absolutely fine, but you'll want to make sure that your students can see you. So, I've probably told this story to a few of you who've come into my other Zoom trainings, but our first day of working from home as a team, I was sitting in this room, but in a different chair, and I have a window behind me in that chair. And what I realized was that as much as I really liked the sun, it really put me in shadow. So you could see this sort of bright sunlight and then just this shadowy figure. And I realized this is not a great user experience for people who are in a meeting with me. So I actually had to move my seat. So just making sure that, if you're going to be on camera for your Zoom meeting, that people can see you and that you're framed properly. And all I mean by that is that, that you are in the middle of your camera image. So What I mean is that the camera isn't like this. You're not getting a great shot of the top of my head or over here looking at my sweet VCR from 1988. That it's me in the middle of the camera that people can actually see. This is especially important for accessibility. So if you have any students that need to be able to see, you know, to see you as you speak, it's really important that you're well lit and that, you know, people can see your face. Something else to keep in mind is that there are a couple of different ways that you can have the camera images appear on your screen, which is to say that if you kind of mouse over the different camera, you know, the different sort of images of people who are in this meeting, for example, if you go to the very top of that menu, there are a couple of different options available to you. One of them is called Gallery View. And it gives sort of a nice overlay of all the different images. And you'll want to play around with these different settings just to see what works best for you. But just know that there are options available to you in terms of trying to get, you know, as many camera images as feels sort of, you know, comfortable to you on your screen. Again, you'll want to make sure that students know how to change their name. I know we already talked about this a little bit. And again, once your meeting is live, making sure that you're welcoming everyone into the room. People are going to come into the room at different times, probably. Let's say you have a meeting set up at 10 o'clock in the morning. Some people will come in at 9:58. Some people will come in at 10:04. So having a welcome message in the chat, welcoming people a few times, you know, within reason. You know, if people are coming in 15 minutes later, you know, don't feel as if you necessarily have to stop everything, but, you know, make sure that it's a welcoming environment to your students, and remind students that, you know, if they're not speaking, a best practice is to have their mics muted. Like I am doing right now, I would definitely invite a colleague to be with you in the room. It's very helpful, especially if you are anticipating a bigger group. So if you're scheduling, you know, a Zoom meeting where it's just, you know, a one-on-one meeting, or it's a small group, you might not need a second set of eyes in the room and a second set of expertise. But if, let's say you're expecting, let's see how many people, we have 20 people in the room right now, that would be tough for me to manage all on my own. So feel free to invite a colleague to be part of that meeting space while you're speaking, so that you don't feel like you have to be that one person band. Another pro tip to keep in mind is really around the idea of sharing video. And what I mean by that is not being on camera, but if, let's say, you were teaching a lesson and you wanted students to look at a video clip that you had available, you'll need to share those via a URL. So my best practice around that is having it sort of open in a new tab on your screen. And there's a setting that Zoom has put in that is, I don't know why they've made it so ferociously small, but it's, and I know that I wear glasses, but even if my vision were 20/20, this is incredibly tiny. I have a screenshot of it here, and it's not a fantastic rendering, but it's also, it wouldn't matter because it's in like 3-point font. At the bottom of your share, when you're going to share a video, at the very bottom of that share pod, one of the little check boxes there says optimize screen share for video clip. If you're going to share a video clip, you'll want that box checked, just so that the video quality is the highest it can be. So I am talking about share screen. Yes, Sarah. And one of the options is, if you want to share video, you'll want to make sure that you click on that optimize screen share for video clip. So you would click on that tiny little box at the bottom if you want to share a video clip. And then you would just have the video open in a new tab. Now, I don't know how many of you would actually use this, but in case you wanted to, I wanted you to know that it's there. I probably wouldn't recommend sharing a video that's longer than 5 minutes. In a Zoom setting, you're just going to lose audience's attention after that long. But if there was a particular video clip you wanted them to watch within that space, you could do that. Similarly, if there are documents that you'd like to share, you can definitely share those as Google Doc links in the chat. I would recommend using Google Docs just because if you're using Google Classroom, keeping everything in the Google environment is a great idea. There is no upload or download feature of documents right now for us in the Zoom and Clever environment. I know that if you use other video conferencing capabilities, even Zoom outside of Clever, you could explore that, but I would not recommend that. Again, you want to be accessing Zoom only through Clever. So if you're going to be sharing documents, you can copy and paste those Google Doc links in the chat. Also, if you are interested in exploring the breakout group capability, breakout groups are available through Zoom basic accounts. Some people think this is just a pro account capability. It is not. So if you want to use breakouts in Zoom, all that really is the ability to break a group into smaller groups. Basically, Zoom does this through one of two ways. Either you can have Zoom choose the participants in the breakout group for you, meaning it's random, or you can actually choose whom you want in each breakout room. Again, this would be a great use case for having another set of eyes in the room so that although you as the facilitator can go from breakout room to breakout room to sort of check how things are going, it's always nice to have a second facilitator in there helping you with that task.
Casey, if I can just follow up on something really quickly here.
Sure, absolutely.
So in the chat, just to let you know, it's easy to cut and paste stuff within the chat. So again, if you have a Google Doc that you want to share or file you want to share or video or whatnot, you want to share it in the chat through a link, that's fine. We've noticed though having some issues with cutting and pasting from the chat though. Mm-hmm. So it might be the case that, or copying and pasting from the chat, for some reason the copy doesn't highlight and nor does it cut. So you can't cut out of the chat. So you can, just want to let you know that it's kind of hard to copy and paste from the chat into something else. It's easy to copy and paste or cut and paste from something else into chat, but the other way around is kind of tough. Just a little thing that we noticed.
Thanks. So, some security tips. One of the things that I wanted to make sure that I highlighted was that if you're going to be sharing your Zoom link and you have to, oh, sure, Sarah has a question. How do you use the breakout rooms feature? Fantastic question, so we'll come back. So breakout rooms is one of the options that's in the black bar if you are the host. Another question we've had in other Zoom trainings has been, how many hosts can I have in a meeting? You have one host, but then there can be co-hosts. So if you are a host or a co-host, you can actually put people into breakout rooms. Because Sarah, you're not in as a host or a co-host right now, when you mouse over your black bar at the bottom of your screen, you do not see the breakout rooms feature, but it is one of the options in that black bar when you're in as a host or a co-host. So this is something that, again, I would recommend, Sarah. No, you're not interrupting. You're asking a great question, and I'm really glad that you did. I should have mentioned it, so thank you. So it's one of the options in that black bar. And again, this is something that I would encourage everyone to practice ahead of time if you feel like that's something you want to try. There's also a feature around polling, which you can launch polls within Zoom, which is pretty fun to do. I've used polls as like a barometer activity in a classroom. So if you wanted to, sort of get students' opinions on something, it's kind of a fun interactive tool. You can do a raise your hand or lower your hand in Zoom. These are all things that are worth playing around with. And again, if you are interested in inviting one of us, certainly I'll speak for myself, if you want to invite me to one of your practice Zooms, I'm happy to be a Zoom guinea pig and to raise my hand, lower my hand, answer a poll question, make sure I can see you sharing your screen, throw me into a breakout room, whatever you want to do. Happy to practice those things, but it's the kind of thing that you'd want to practice to sort of feel comfortable with. Hopefully that helps. So one of the things that I wanted to mention in terms of Zoom security is, and it's really sort of this double-edged sword. As much as we want to share Zoom links with our students and make sure that they see them and that they know that you're having these meetings where you can actually see their faces and talk to them, We also don't want people outside of the BPS environment, and really people outside of your class, to be aware of, just because we really want to keep these meetings as secure as possible. I see a great question in the chat. If we invite students to a Zoom meeting, do they have Zoom and Clever on their side? Do they just click on the link that you send? They can just click on the link that you send. Angela is asking, can we share links in Google Hangouts? I would prefer that you do this either through email or through Google Classroom. I think Hangouts is probably okay in the sense that if you're just sort of like chatting a person back and forth. What we don't want to do is post Zoom links on Google Sites, which are more public facing. And again, I'll make the distinction between Google Classroom, which is a closed environment. It's invitation only. It's a space that you have built within Google to sort of essentially have a virtual classroom with your students. Where you would not want to post links are public facing sites. So if you built a site in Google Sites, or if you have a Twitter feed, Snapchat, Instagram, Facebook, please do not post links there. I see Sarah's asking, my school uses the PowerSchool Learning Online platform. Is it okay to post links there? My understanding of PowerSchool is really only actually through my daughter's experience of PowerSchool. Her school uses it as well. If the information were behind a login, which is to say that outside entities couldn't see it, that would be one thing. But if it were public facing, which is to say someone would not require a login to see that information, then I would say no. I don't know if that answers your question, Sarah. The reason for why we don't want links posted more publicly, you're welcome, is because we don't want outside entities to be aware of the link to your Zoom room and be able to join. Now, remember that within the Zoom for Clever environment, certain settings are disabled, which is to say, screen sharing for participants is disabled for Zoom for Clever. So for example, right now as the host of this meeting, I can share my screen, but I couldn't have you as a participant share your screen. That's not something that's enabled within Zoom Access by Clever. Private chats. What I mean by private chats are if, let's say, my colleagues, Nick and Christina, wanted to have a chat, if they were participants in the meeting, they would not be able to do that privately. That is a setting that does exist in Zoom in general. It's been disabled here just to maintain student security. We've already talked about this one, attendees' ability to join before the host. So what would happen in that case is that, let's say attendees, so students wanted to come to your Zoom meeting that was scheduled for 10 a.m. at 9:58. Even if you're already in the room, if you haven't opened the room yet to your attendees, they're going to get that waiting room screen. So they cannot access the room before you do. Also, the ability to record Zoom meetings has been disabled within the Zoom for Clever environment, just so that, again, we maintain student security. And then finally, as I've mentioned, I know I've harped on the waiting room many times. The waiting room is enabled in Zoom if you access it through Clever, so just know that that is there. So something that I would really encourage you to do is explore this menu that I took a screenshot of. This is, I referred to the back end, quote unquote, of Zoom earlier in the meeting. This is really what it looks like. So you have this menu. It's sort of like, it's like a shaded blue bar on the left-hand side of your screen that will appear when you're logged into Zoom. And what you'll want to do is, initially you'll probably start out in meetings. That's where you're going, you could schedule a meeting, but in settings, which is a couple of menu items down in that shaded menu, you'll want to go in there, and I couldn't take screenshots of all of the settings because there are so many settings in Zoom. I would set aside on your calendar an hour to go through all the different settings to see all the different things you can do. And again, this is something that really just requires, practice and time. So it's something that you'll have to spend some time with, playing around with, getting used to. You'll see that certain settings are already enabled for you through the Clever environment. But if there are other settings you want to play around with, you certainly can. And I would encourage you to do that just because, you know, you'll want to be familiar with all the different capabilities available to you. So by my clock, I have been talking at you for a solid 37 minutes.
Nice.
I know, I try. Are there questions? I know I've thrown a lot at you, so I want to pause. I tried to answer as many questions as I could as we were moving through, but if things have kind of surfaced as I've been talking, I'm more than happy to answer them. You can either unmute your mic or if you want to jump in the chat. Great question. So Sarah asked, could you explain how the whiteboard works? So whiteboard is here. It's one of those options that's within the share capability that's at, when you're a host in a meeting, you have more options available to you in that black bar that appears at the bottom of your screen. So what I'm doing right now is I'm sharing my screen, but I am sharing a Google slide deck that I've prepared. So what I do is I go to that black bar, I click on the share, and then it asks me a few questions of what I would want to do. Right now, I'm actually looking, and it looks as if whiteboard has actually been disabled on this. So it's possible that that setting has been disabled for us now, but generally speaking, whiteboard is one of the settings that is one of the share options. Sarah, I'll look into whether or not that's been disabled for the district, because I'm not seeing it appear in my share capability right now.
Yeah, it's not in mine either, unfortunately.
So that could have been one of the settings that was disabled, but Sarah, I will follow up about that. Essentially, just so you know what it is, yes, there are workarounds though, Sarah, if you were thinking you were counting on, you know, using whiteboards. So a workaround might be that instead of here, and you know what I'll do? I can model this. I will pause my share right now and I can go to, I'm doing this on the fly, but let's say I wanted to open, let's see, a new document in Google Docs, okay? And I have paused my share, so you should still be seeing my slide deck, but I'm gonna go back to my share menu. What I'm doing behind the scenes here is I paused my share and then I went to my Google Docs and now I've opened. And now what you should see is my whole desktop, and you should see that I have an open Google Doc. Is everybody able to see that? I'm seeing yes. Okay, great. So you could also use Google Draw, but in the interest of time, I just wanted to throw something up to sort of show you. So if you wanted to share your screen and be able to sort of model something that you're doing on screen, you could do that through other means. So if you wanted to use Google Draw, if you wanted to use a Google Doc, and Sarah, if this is something that you know you want to try out, you know, one-on-one, we could schedule time, or if you wanted to come to an office hour, but don't feel as if without the whiteboard, all is lost. There are workarounds for all this stuff. And I'm watching the chat just to see if other questions come up. So what I also want to share, and I'll do this while if people are typing questions, we have a bunch of additional resources that I wanted to just put on your radar. I know that there is no shortage of resources being thrown at you right now. So I say this with full awareness, like, oh my goodness, more resources. But a lot of these will probably be pretty helpful to you as you begin to explore Zoom. So the first one that I want to sort of put on your radar is this BPS Digital Learning Resources page. And Nick, if you wouldn't mind throwing that link in the chat, that would be fantastic. Again, by filling out the the form that we mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, you will get access to this slide deck, which will include links to all of these resources. But I just wanted to make sure that, you know, I modeled them for you here as well. So the BPS Digital Learning Resources page, oh, thank you, that's the sign-in sheet. And then I can also grab, there, let me grab it for us. This is a link to a page where you can see all of our upcoming events. You can see that, let me just get back in here. You can see that we have a bunch of webinars coming up today, as well as the rest of the week, as well as office hours. There's a help doc that we have created about Zoom. We have a help doc as well about Zoom and Clever and how they interact. I have a link in this slide deck to the Zoom support page, which is actually fantastic in terms of all the different resources that Zoom has created to support its users. We have a document of Zoom instructions for students that you can share with your students, as well as a slide deck around Zoom safety tips. So just know that all of this is coming to you if you wouldn't mind filling out that, that Google form that I know Nick has put in the chat. That is something that you will get along with the recording of this webinar.
And folks, just want to follow up on what Casey said for a second. Yeah, we're all new to this. We're all getting started with it. And, you know, give yourself that space to make mistakes, really, and don't get discouraged. Just this morning, I was on a presentation. I was doing a webinar earlier, and I had the wrong slide deck up for about 5 minutes. So it still happens. Okay, so again, don't get discouraged. You know, give yourself that space to make mistakes, because it's going to happen. And you know what? We all do. Even people in tech, we all do make mistakes. So again, don't ever get discouraged in terms of using this. We're all learning, and again, yeah, this is a rough time, and I'm just following up on what Casey said about this whole thing too. I just wanted to double up on it.
Thanks, Nick. Yeah, I think that's a great point. This is my second webinar of 3 in a row, and I had 3 different slide decks up, and I wanted to I had that thought in my head of like, make sure you're talking about Zoom and not something else. So I definitely feel your pain on that one.
Me too, yeah.
So any other questions that we can answer? I want to, again, underscore this idea that this is not the end of this conversation. I really hope that we can connect in office hours, that you reach out to me via email. Again, my email is kkortz@bostonpublicschools.org. I'll put that back in the chat. And I mean it, if you want to invite me to any of your Zoom events to practice, I'm more than happy to be that person. I am so grateful to all of the people in my life who let me invite them to various Zoom practices, so I would get a sense of what I was doing. And although I've been using this tool for a while, I always feel like I'm learning new things. For example, you know, seeing that the whiteboard isn't available right now, it's good to know. And then it just means, you know, you need to find that workaround. But I always learn something when I'm working with teachers too. So please feel free to invite me to any of your practice sessions. I'm happy to participate. Well, thank you, Angela. So if there aren't any other questions, what I'll probably do is stop the recording and please make sure you have filled out that, thank you, Nick. You filled out that form so that I can send you the recording as well as the slide deck. And I'll look forward to seeing you again online soon. Thank you.
Great, folks. Thanks for coming.